Today we're going to learn about how to apply the motivation, tension, and resistance assessment. And this is an assessment that we have developed. We'll talk about how that's going to happen and all that other kind of stuff. But today's practice and learning experiences are designed to help folks who have significant disabilities. So we're going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to try and accomplish today. We're going to talk about why this is different, how does it add to assessment and treatment, what are the fundamental motives, and how do all these things work, the basis for tension and resistance. We're actually going to walk through the assessment and talk about the elements and the terminology. We're going to talk about the importance and barriers. We're going to look at scoring 101. We're going to give a chance to do some quick practice on learning how to do the scoring, identifying the data points and how do we, what are they and what kinds are they and how do we use them, deciding on how we can actually use the data, and identifying those problem areas and potential solutions. We're going to try and figure out how to reduce unnecessary tension and resistance. We're going to build on the strengths and interests. We're going to try and figure out how to negotiate alternatives, and then how to develop some plans. So, all of that to say is that it is a full couple of hours. Can I have you pass those out to everybody for me? Those are the PowerPoint slides. They're not presented in the usual way because I like to make it bigger so that people can actually see them and write on. All right? So, how is this different, and what does it add to the assessment and treatment process? The first thing that's important for you to understand is that this is research-based. This is not just somebody sitting down one afternoon saying, wow, what a great idea this is. So it is, we did base it on research. The second part that's critical here is that this is not about something being normed or referenced to another population group. This is not about comparing you to you. This is about you. This is just about you. This assessment is to help us understand that person as well as we possibly can in ways that hasn't been done before. So this is just a snapshot of the person, but the other thing that it does is it gives us a snapshot of the system of supports. So it gives us an idea of where is the system of supports thinking, feeling, behaving towards you. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next thing is that it gives us a direct and immediate application. This is not something where you go, oh, well, they got an IQ of 68. Yes, so what? I mean, what do you do with that? You got an IQ of 68. Or, well, they've got, their DSM-4 diagnosis is, well, okay, that's great that we have the diagnosis, but it doesn't give us the immediacy of the application of what can we do. That's one of the greatest things about this assessment is that when you get done doing the assessment, you look at it and you go, oh yeah, now you start getting a sense, and the more you use the assessment, the more, even as you're doing the assessment thing, the bells start going off. You're going, oh, ding, 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 got to do something about this one. Yeah, and so we'll talk about how those things start happening. And you're going to hear me say this a couple of times during the day. Even though this is a data-driven, even though this is all about numbers, and I'll grant you, it's a subjective assessment, don't get hung up on it being subjective, because it is a snapshot. Any snapshot is going to be somewhat subjective, okay? And the truth is that all these things that are supposedly objective are really subjective anyway. People just don't like to talk about that. But the conversations that you have with the individual and across the system and with the people who care about that person are as important as the numbers, okay? So don't get, just also narrow focused on the numbers that come out of this, but you start trying to capture and remember why you came to those decisions or the conversations that you had as you were working across the teams or even across agencies who might be providing support. So you've got a case manager who's seeing it one way, and you've got somebody who's in residential seeing it another way, and somebody in vocational seeing it an entirely different way. That's okay. In this model, that's good, believe it or not. Because what it says is that you have an insight into Liz, and you have an insight into Liz, and you have an insight into Liz, that Liz isn't showing the others, okay? So it doesn't mean you're wrong, It means you have an experience with Liz that, and we all do that, don't we? I mean, there's parts of us that show up in different environments, and we behave differently with certain people, and that's not bad. I mean, humans are chameleons, okay? At one level, we work to fit in to our society, but also as our trust levels and our experience levels vary, we disclose different parts of ourselves in those environments. And we do different things with different friends, right? I mean, I have one friend who goes, plays, likes to watch baseball. I'm not that much into baseball, but I do like hanging out with him. And I really like hot dogs, and beer's not bad, and and so, he wants to watch the game. I want to have beer. And it seems like that's a nice way to do that. So anyway, the point is that this is about honest kind of things that are going on, both for the person and for the system. And just because it's different across individuals or across settings doesn't mean that it's wrong or that it's bad anyway. All right, so we're going to talk about the fact that there is both a clinical aspect to this, because when something is like really, really far out of whack, okay, and we'll talk about this later, but their order scores are way high, now we might be starting to look at things like OCD or autism or things along those lines. Does that make sense? If their order scores are way, way low, like totally non-existent, and we'll talk about how this fits in later on, but maybe they've got a type of schizophrenia going on, that they're disorganized to the point of being dysfunctional. Does that make sense? How many of you ever seen the TV show Hoarders? Okay? When you see those people on TV, you go, they're in trouble, right? I mean, it kind of jumps out at you and you go, there's more garbage in that person's house than in the city dump. There's a problem, okay? Well, it's the same kind of thing, is that these numbers start popping at you and start giving you reference points for behavior that can start serving as the clinical assessment support for a diagnosis. And if we're getting some numbers and we're getting some scores that don't seem to line up real well with their current diagnosis, then we've got some stuff to talk about with the clinicians too. Does that make sense? So, we got the clinical and real world use. It is designed to really help us do treatment interactions and look at relationships and what are some things that we can do in those interactions. And we'll talk about how this, the research that Dr. Stephen Reese did in his original work with Susan Haverkamp, and they actually came up with some profiles of folks so that you can actually do an overlay. And you can go, okay, it scores real low on order and real high on the need for attention and real low. And so you get this little kind of ziggity-zaggity pattern. And he actually has these things where you can do overlays and you can look at it and you go, oh, that looks a whole lot like major league depression. Or that looks a whole lot like anxiety. So now we've got some things that we can do in terms of the treatments, okay? Also, it starts telling us how people need us to interact with them, okay? Because how many of you are auditory learners? If somebody tells you something, you can usually understand it. Anybody here an auditory learner? Okay. How many of you are visual learners? You need to see it and read it to get it in, okay? Anybody here a kinesthetic learner? You have to do it before it actually all makes sense. You have to kind of practice it once or twice. Well, the same kinds of things can be true about interactions, okay? Because, one kind of interaction, you just shut me down. If I'm coming off real strong and Mr. Macho, you're going, I don't want anything to do with you. It's kind of like, bam, because it's confronting a sensitivity, and we'll talk about what that means later, but it's something you're trying to avoid, so you're not listening to me. Have you ever been in trouble and it doesn't matter, boss, parent, whatever, and somebody's like chewing you out and you realize at some point you can't even hear their words because you're talking to yourself on the inside more than you. So you're going, don't freak out, don't yell at them, don't tell them how stupid they are. Keep it in control, because you know you don't want to lose your job, or you don't want to lose your relationship, or whatever. And so you see their mouth moving, but it's your words that you're hearing. Well, the same thing is true about folks who have significant disabilities that we're looking at working with this assessment. Is it starts telling us how do they need to hear things from us. And this is not about, quote, being manipulative. It's about addressing them in a way that helps them be able to benefit from the interaction. Okay? So that's what that means. The other thing that when we talk about is it helps us see the invisible elephants. Because there are invisible elephants in all of our lives. All of us have an invisible elephant. We got stuff, and we got holes, and we got baggages, and you know, I mean, we all got it because stuff happens to us, and we carry some of that with us. It just is. Okay, that's the way it is. But the point is we're not advertising it, right? We're not going, yeah, well, my mom was an alcoholic and she used to beat me and then she would abandon me and, you know, she'd forget where we were and she'd disappear. We don't advertise that kind of stuff, but that's an invisible elephant we're dragging along with us everywhere we go, okay? The thing that this assessment helps us do is start visualizing the parameters, the outline of those invisible elephants, because we can start seeing, oh, that's why he or she might be doing this, okay? Now, I'm an old behavioralist. You know, I was raised in the behavioral model. I was like, you know, it doesn't matter why they're doing it. The only thing you got to do is get them to stop doing it. The problem is that when you do that, when I take away a behavior from you, you will switch. And it's called symptom substitution. So the behavior that you used to do may be gone, but it almost always comes with a new behavior that's bigger or worse. So instead of trying to suppress this behavior, which creates this new behavior, what I do is I give you an array of acceptable behaviors that meet an intrinsic need that you have, and that's part of what we're trying to do is figure out what is the intrinsic motivation or the intrinsic need structure, and everybody's different, okay? Everybody's going to be different, and it's supposed to be that way, okay? Because if we were all the same, you know, then it would be kind of boring, right? All right, so we're trying to figure out what is that intrinsic motivation pattern, and then kind of set up a buffet of things that are interesting to you. So that you can go, that person can go, oh, I want to do that and that and that. And when they're busy doing those things, they're not as busy doing the aberrant or the problem behaviors. Does that make sense? But that's also part of reducing the tension and resistance, and we'll talk about that as we go on. I don't know if you can see that slide very well, but there's an example of, there's a cow in the back seat of that Volvo. Okay? Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that seems kind of weird. Right? But the person driving the car obviously thought it was necessary to do this. Does that make sense? Okay? The reality is that this guy or this woman who has decided to put the cow inside of the car decided that the traditional ways of doing things weren't going to work for them, or you know, that they didn't historically work, whatever, so they didn't think they were going to work again. And so they're doing the best they can with what they've got. That's one of the important things about this assessment and this process is it's not that you're bad or that you're wrong or anything else. It is that you're doing the best you know how to get your needs met the only ways that you understand. And the fact that you may be choosing ways that are very, very different from what everybody else does may have a lot to do with the invisible elephant that you're dragging around with you. You know, and if the invisible elephant is whispering into your ear, put the cow in the back seat. You're going, okay, got to put the cow in the back seat. Now, so what we have to understand is that we're going to try and figure out, for the folks that we're working with, a certain amount of why. Why is it that they're engaging in these things? So it's no longer good enough to just say, I'm going to change behavior. I want to have some insight into that behavior, because the more insight I have into your behavior, the more likely it is I'm going to be able to help support you